The light in the grand sanctum of the concordance was a living thing, a column of captured starlight that fell from the vaulted, crystalline ceiling to illuminate the central dais. It was ancient light, collected from 1,000 suns across 1,000,000 years, and its spectrum shifted with the gravitas of the precedings. Today, it was the cold, hard blue of a nascent star, reflecting the stark, chilling reality of their debate. Prelate Vexus of the Cathar, his multifaceted form absorbing and refracting the harsh light, felt the silence as a physical weight upon his chassis. His kind did not breathe, but he felt an internal pressure that mimicked the sensation of a held breath, a tension that had been building for cycles. He was old enough to remember the last time the concordance had invoked the great filter protocol, and the memory was a scar upon the collective consciousness of his people. That memory was now being reawakened by the specter of a single, insignificant species from a forgotten arm of the galaxy: humanity. Before him, arrayed in descending tiers of obsidian and polished metal, sat the delegates of the concordance member worlds. The air, thick with recycled atmospherics and the subtle energy fields of a dozen different biologies, crackled with unspoken fear and overt aggression. The debate had raged for days, a storm of logic, passion, and political maneuvering, but it always returned to the same terrifying point. The quarantine around the Sol system, the impenetrable energy barrier they had erected centuries ago to contain the volatile, unpredictable species known as humans, was failing. Not just failing, but dissolving in a manner that defied their most advanced understanding of physics. "It is an act of war," boomed the voice of warlord Zorgan of the Grawl, his chitinous exoskeleton rasping against the stone of his rostrum. His species was a monument to brutal efficiency, warriors bred for conquest, and his worldview was as sharp and uncomplicated as the blades on his forelimb, he atop inus. "The primitives have developed a weapon capable of dismantling a celestial-scale energy field. They have been planning this, scheming in their isolated little cage. For centuries, we have upheld the sacred duty of the filter, protecting the tranquility of the galaxy from chaotic, self-destructive species. We identified the humans as a Tier 1 threat, rapid, uncontrolled technological advancement coupled with endemic factionalism and a primal capacity for violence. We were right to imprison them. Their breakout is not a plea for entry into our society. It is the first salvo of an invasion." Zorgan's mandibles clicked, a sound of finality that echoed in the vast chamber. His supporters, primarily from the martial races of the Outer Rim, signaled their assent with percussive thumps of appendages against their consoles. They saw the universe as a simple equation of power. You either possessed it, or you were subject to it. A species that could break the concordance's most powerful form of containment was a species that needed to be broken in turn, swiftly and without mercy. From a tier above, a soft, melodic chime requested the right to speak. The light shifted, softening to a gentle lavender as it focused on Archivist Lyra of the Lumina. Her people were beings of near-pure intellect, their physical forms little more than shimmering, graceful constructs of light and force, tethered to reality by will alone. "Warlord Zorgan speaks of war, but he has offered no evidence of hostile intent." Lyra's voice was not sound, but a direct telepathic resonance, cool and clear as spring water in the minds of all present. "The quarantine is failing, yes, but the energy signature is not that of a weapon. It is harmonic, a resonant cascade. Our physicists cannot explain it. To respond with a fleet of warships would be to fire into the dark at a shadow. We do not know what we are facing." "We are facing the unknown. That is reason enough," Zorgan countered, his voice a guttural roar. "They were chaotic. Their own historical records, the ones we archived before the quarantine was sealed, are a litany of self-inflicted wounds. They waged war over ideology, over resources, over skin pigmentation. They poisoned their own world. They are a plague that learned to build tools. Shall we wait until the pestilence is at our door before we act to sterilize it?" Vexus listened, his ancient mind processing the binary arguments. Strength versus caution, fear versus curiosity. It was the eternal debate of the concordance, the schism that had defined it since its inception. The great filter protocol itself was a product of fear. Ages ago, the founding species had witnessed the ruins of a precursor race, the Ascended, who had torn a galaxy apart in a civil war of unimaginable scale. The lesson they had learned was that technological advancement without commensurate wisdom was the ultimate cosmic poison. And so they had taken it upon themselves to be the galaxy's arbiters, its gardeners, pruning the branches they deemed unhealthy before they could threaten the whole tree. But Vexus had always harbored a sliver of doubt, a cold, crystalline shard of uncertainty in his core programming. Was it wisdom, or was it arrogance? By what right did they seal away entire species, condemning them to isolation or extinction based on a snapshot of their development? He had reviewed the human archives himself, countless times. He had witnessed their brutality, yes, but he had also witnessed their art, their music, their philosophy. He saw a species at war with itself, a terrifying and beautiful contradiction. They could create symphonies that could make a Cathar's crystalline structure resonate with emotion, and in the next moment they could unleash atomic fire upon their own cities. They were a paradox, and the concordance in its rigid logic had no tolerance for paradoxes. They had been deemed too dangerous to be allowed to mature. A junior aide, a young Cathar whose facets still held the shimmer of recent formation, approached Vexus's dais, its movements precise and deferential. It placed a data slate before him. Vexus accessed it directly, the information flowing into his consciousness. The quarantine field around the Sol system was now at less than a tenth of its operational strength. But more than that, long-range sensors were picking up a transmission from within. It was audio, simple and archaic, broadcast on a wide band, as if the sender wanted to ensure it was heard but didn't care about the sophistication of the receiver. The message was looped, repeating over and over. Vexus activated the chamber's primary audio receptor, letting the alien sound fill the sanctum. A voice, clear and devoid of any discernible emotion, spoke in the concordance's trade language, its pronunciation flawless, yet unnervingly flat. It was a voice that held no anger, no triumph, no fear. It was the voice of a simple, declarative truth. Earth's final message to the galaxy, the voice stated, the words hanging in the air like frozen dust motes. And then the payload, the phrase that would shatter the fragile peace of the last millennium. You made this choice, you were warned, now pay the price. The chamber erupted. Zorgan's warriors rose as one, their armor plates clattering, their war cries echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The Lumina contingent shimmered with agitation, their forms fluctuating wildly. Delegates shouted over one another, demanding action, demanding explanations. It was a declaration of war, a direct threat. The primitives were not only escaping, they were gloating. But Vexus did not hear a threat. He heard a statement of fact. His mind replayed the words, dissecting them with the cold logic of his kind. You made this choice, the choice to implement the filter, the choice to imprison them. You were warned. This was the part that chilled him to his core. How had they been warned? The Concordance had monitored all transmissions from the Sol system for decades before the field was fully sealed. They had seen military buildups, political speeches, broadcasts of primitive entertainment. They had dismissed it all as the chaotic noise of a doomed culture. Had they missed something? Had a warning been hidden in a poem, in a mathematical equation broadcast for a forgotten probe, in the melancholy notes of a cello solo? Now pay the price, the price. Zorgan saw the price as annihilation, but the voice, it was too calm. It was the voice of a judge reading a verdict, not a soldier screaming a battle cry. It was the voice of inevitability. Silence, Vexus commanded. His voice was not loud, but it resonated at a frequency that commanded the attention of every being in the sanctum, cutting through the cacophony like a blade of focused light. The chamber fell quiet, the echoes of their panic dying against the ancient stone. Warlord Zorgan, Vexus said, his gaze fixed on the Grawl. You will mobilize your fleets, but you will not advance. You will form a perimeter at the edge of the Orion Spur, and you will hold your position. You will not, under any circumstances, engage any vessel emerging from the Sol system unless fired upon. Is that understood? Zorgan bristled, his mandibles working in agitation. Prelate, this is cowardice. We must strike now while we have the element of surprise. The element of surprise was lost the moment our quarantine failed in a way we cannot comprehend, Vexus countered, his tone unyielding. We are facing a species that has had centuries of isolated, focused development. We do not know what they have become. We will not greet them with blind aggression. That was the mistake we made when we judged them. We will not make it again. He then turned his attention to Lyra. Archivist, you and your people will redouble your efforts. Analyze the energy signature of the collapsing field. Analyze the transmission, every inflection, every wave form, and scour the archives. Go back to the pre-quarantine data. Find this warning they speak of. Find it, no matter how insignificant it may have seemed. Lyra bowed her head of light. It will be done, Prelate. Vexus settled back into his dais, the blue starlight making his crystalline form seem like a mountain of ice. The chamber was silent once more, but this was a different kind of silence. The heated noise of debate was gone, replaced by the cold, heavy dread of anticipation. The galaxy was holding its breath. For centuries, they had been the jailers, the arbiters, the silent gods of the Milky Way, watching over their perceived lessers. Now the door to one of the cells was opening from the inside, and a voice was coming from the darkness, a voice that did not plead or beg, but simply stated that a debt had come due. The price was about to be paid, and for the first time in his long, ordered existence, Prelate Vexus was utterly, profoundly afraid of the cost. The human paradox which the concordance had tried to erase had not been solved. It had merely been given time to bloom in the dark. The waiting was a unique form of torment for the concordance. They were a civilization of action, of data, of predictable outcomes. The unknown was a poison to their collective psyche. Zorgan's fleets, a glittering armada of warships that had pacified entire sectors, now sat idle, their crews on edge, their weapon systems charged but silent. Lyra's archivists sifted through petabytes of archaic human data, a frantic search for a ghost. They analyzed millennia of human art, literature, and science, looking for a hidden threat, a coded message they had overlooked. They found expressions of sorrow, of hope, of defiance, the chaotic emotional spectrum of a young race wrestling with its own nature, but nothing that could be construed as a direct warning to a galactic power they did not even know for certain existed. Meanwhile, the quarantine field continued its elegant, terrifying collapse. It did not explode or shatter. It unraveled like a tapestry of light being carefully unstitched, thread by thread. The resonant cascade that Lyra had detected was growing stronger, and her physicists could only describe it in poetic, desperate terms. It was as if the very fabric of spacetime around the Sol system was being taught a new song, and the old one was fading into silence. Then it was gone. The field, a monument to the concordance's power and hubris for nearly 1,000 years, vanished. For a full rotation, nothing happened. The sensors, now unobscured, peered into the Sol system for the first time in centuries. They saw a star, planets, the familiar orbital ballet. They saw no massive fleets, no planet-killing weapons aimed outward, no signs of the frantic, militaristic buildup they had expected. They saw a system that was quiet, deceptively quiet. Vexus watched the sensor feeds from his meditation chamber, the data streaming directly into his consciousness. He saw Earth. It was green and blue, more vibrant than their last scans had suggested. The rampant industrial pollution that had been a key factor in their negative assessment was gone. The atmosphere was clean. He saw cities, but they were different. They were seamlessly integrated into the landscape, structures of white and silver that seemed to grow out of the earth rather than being built upon it. There was light, but it was soft, contained. There was activity, but it was orderly, calm. This was not the chaotic, self-immolating world they had imprisoned. It was Warlord Zorgan who first reported the object. His fleet's long-range gravimetric sensors detected a single, massive anomaly emerging from the system's outer edge, moving at a stately, deliberate pace. It was not accelerating with the brute force of a propulsion drive. It was simply moving, as if space itself was willingly carrying it forward. The object resolved on visual sensors, and a wave of confusion and disbelief washed over the Concordance leadership. It was not a ship, not in any recognizable sense. It was a perfect sphere, several kilometers in diameter, and it was utterly, absolutely black. It did not reflect light. It did not emit any energy. It absorbed everything, every sensor wave, every particle, every photon that touched its surface. It was a hole in the universe, a sphere of pure nothingness gliding silently toward the waiting Graal fleet. Zorgan's voice, for the first time, held a trace of uncertainty. "Prelate, what are your orders? This thing, it defies all known design principles. It has no discernible engines, no weapons, no viewports, no communications array. It is a void." "Hold your position, Warlord," Vexus commanded, his own mind struggling to process the visual. The sphere was an affront to physics, a statement of absolute mastery over light and matter. It was not a weapon bristling with guns. It was something far more intimidating. It was a symbol of a technology so far beyond their own that it appeared as a simple, primal shape. "It is a trick," Zorgan snarled, his bravado returning. "A psychological weapon. They are trying to make us fear the dark. My ships will reduce that bauble to its constituent atoms." "You will do nothing," Vexus insisted. "You are the shield of the Concordance, Zorgan, not its fist. Remember that." The black sphere continued its unhurried approach. It stopped precisely at the edge of the former quarantine line, maintaining a respectful distance from the Graal armada. It made no move, broadcast no signal. It simply waited, a silent black sentinel hanging in the void. For hours, the standoff held. The most powerful military force in the galaxy faced a single, silent object and was paralyzed by sheer incomprehension. Then a channel opened. Not a radio wave or a laser pulse, but a quantum-entangled communication link that bypassed all concordant security protocols and established itself directly with the grand sanctum on the concordant's capital world. It was a form of communication so advanced, so impossibly elegant, that it was like a deity whispering directly into the heart of their network. In the center of the sanctum, where the column of starlight fell, a new light appeared. It coalesced, shimmering, and then resolved into a perfect, three-dimensional holographic image. It was a human, a female dressed in a simple, unadorned uniform of dark gray. Her features were symmetrical, her expression calm, her eyes a deep, unwavering blue. She stood with a stillness that was utterly unnerving, a stark contrast to the emotionally volatile creatures Vexus remembered from the archives. "I am Ambassador Eva Rostova, representing the unified state of Sol," she said. Her voice was the same one from the message, but hearing it come from a person, seeing the calm intelligence in her eyes, gave it a new and terrifying weight. There was no inflection of arrogance or superiority. It was the voice of a scientist presenting her findings, calm, clear, and absolute. Vexus was the first to respond, his own voice amplified through the sanctum's emitters. "I am Prelate Vexus, speaker for the Concordance. You have violated a galactic quarantine. You have issued a threat. Explain yourselves." The ambassador, Rostova, inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, not subservience. "There is much to explain, Prelate, but first let us correct the premise of your statement. We did not violate your quarantine, we dissolved it, and we did not issue a threat. We delivered a verdict, one that you yourselves authored." Zorgan's enraged image flared to life beside Rostova's. "Your insolence is astounding, human. We are the Concordance. We have crushed civilizations more advanced than yours could ever dream of becoming. That sphere you hide behind will be your tomb." Rostova's gaze shifted to Zorgan's hologram. Her expression did not change. She did not sneer or frown. She simply looked at him, and in that calm, analytical gaze, Zorgan's blustering rage seemed to shrink, becoming small and childish. "Warlord Zorgan," she said, her tone even. "Your species values strength. You believe power is measured in the number of ships you command and the destructive yield of their weapons. You are operating on a flawed paradigm." She turned her gaze back to Vexus. "Prelate, you asked how you were warned. The warning was not in a weapon schematic or a declaration of war. For decades before you sealed your quarantine, we broadcast everything we were. Our art, our science, our philosophical struggles. We sent out the compositions of Bach and the equations of Einstein. We sent out the words of Plato and the paintings of Rembrandt. We showed you our capacity for great love and great sorrow, for transcendent creation and terrible destruction. We were showing you that we were a complex species, a species grappling with its own potential, and we were asking for guidance, or at least for dialogue. Your predecessors in this chamber reviewed our transmissions and saw only chaos and threat. They did not see the struggle. They saw only the symptoms. You saw a fever and decided the patient must be euthanized rather than helped to heal. That was your warning, our very existence broadcast for all to see. You chose to interpret it as a threat." A profound silence descended upon the sanctum. Lyra's shimmering form pulsed with a soft, mournful light. Vexus felt the truth of Rostova's words resonate deep within his crystalline structure. They had been so certain of their own wisdom, their own superiority. They had judged an entire species on its turbulent adolescence, never once considering that such turbulence might be a necessary crucible for growth. "And the price?" Vexus asked, his voice softer now. "The message stated we must pay the price. What is it you demand of us? Surrender? Tribute?" Ambassador Rostova's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile, and it was the most chilling thing Vexus had ever seen. It was not a smile of malice, but of a profound, almost sorrowful understanding. "You misunderstand. The price is not something we demand of you. It is a consequence of your own actions, a debt that has been accruing interest for 1,000 years. The price is the truth." She raised a hand, and the holographic display around her expanded. It showed a map of their region of the galaxy. It was familiar to every delegate present. But then, Rostova overlaid a new set of data. Dark, shadowy patches appeared on the map, like ink bleeding through parchment. They were concentrated in the regions where the Concordance had, over the millennia, established its quarantine fields. "Your Great Filter Protocol is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of spacetime," Rostova explained, her voice taking on the quality of a lecturer. "The energy matrix you use to create your quarantine barriers, it is imperfect. It does not simply wall off a system. On a quantum level, it creates a shear in the fabric of reality, a dissonance. Over centuries, this dissonance bleeds. It creates null causality zones, pockets of space where the fundamental laws of physics begin to fray. She pointed to one of the dark patches on the map, a region near a long-extinct civilization that the Concordance had filtered eons ago. Your sensors have likely registered these as dark sectors, areas of unusual gravitational and energy readings. You have avoided them, assuming them to be natural but dangerous phenomena. They are not natural. They are scars, wounds inflicted upon the universe by your technology, and they are growing. The quarantine you placed around our system was the largest and most powerful you had ever constructed. It was also, therefore, the most unstable. Left unchecked, it would not have simply contained us. In another few centuries, the resulting null zone would have cascaded, consuming your entire capital sector. The delegates were stunned into silence. Zorgan's hologram flickered, his blustering fury replaced by a stony, uncomprehending shock. What she was suggesting was impossible. It meant their most sacred tool of preservation was, in fact, a weapon of slow, indiscriminate self-destruction. We were trapped inside a collapsing cage, Rostova continued, her calm voice narrating a horror story of cosmic proportions. We had two choices, perish or understand the cage better than its makers. We spent centuries devoted to a single purpose, the study of fundamental physics. We had to. It was our only path to survival. We did not develop weapons to break your wall. We developed an understanding of reality that allowed us to simply ask it to step aside. The resonant cascade your scientists detected was us, recalibrating the space-time geometry of our entire system, gently persuading the universe to heal the wound you had inflicted upon it. The black sphere, Vexis now understood. It was not a warship. It was a tool, a device of such profound technological sophistication that it could manipulate the very fabric of reality. It was a surgeon's scalpel for the universe itself. "So this is your revenge?" Vexis asked, the question barely a whisper. "You will stand by and watch us be consumed by the consequences of our own ignorance." "No," Rostova said, and for the first time a flicker of something like emotion entered her voice, not anger but a deep, weary gravity. "That is not who we became. The crucible of our confinement forged a unified people. We learned that survival is a collective exercise. Our survival is now inexorably linked to the survival of the galaxy itself. We cannot simply leave, knowing the wounds you have left behind will continue to fester." She looked directly at Vexis, her blue eyes seeming to pierce through the holographic interface, through the light years of space, and into his very being. "You made this choice. You chose to imprison us. You were warned. We tried to show you the complexity of our spirit, and you dismissed it. Now you must pay the price. The price is humility. The price is the admission that your understanding is incomplete. The price is accepting aid from the prisoners you left to die." She gestured again, and the image of the black sphere appeared beside her. "This vessel and others like it are not weapons of war. They are reality-stabilizing engines. We are not here to conquer you. We are here to repair the damage you have done to the galaxy. We are here to save you from yourselves. The only question is," her gaze swept across the stunned and silent delegates of the Grand Sanctum, "will you let us?" The silence that followed was heavier than any Vexis had ever known. It was the sound of an entire civilization's worldview shattering. The primitives, the chaotic, violent apes they had locked away had not become conquerors. They had become something else entirely. They had become saviors, and their salvation came in the form of a bill, an invoice for 1,000 years of fear and arrogance, a price that could only be paid by dismantling the very foundations of their identity. The choice, once again, was theirs. But this time, they were looking not at a prisoner in a cage, but at a doctor holding the only cure to a disease they had never known they had. The Grand Sanctum became a tomb of introspection. The echoes of Ambassador Rostova's revelations reverberated not as sound, but as a psychic shockwave that fractured the Concordance's ancient certainties. Warlord Zorgan and his allies were silent, their militaristic ideology rendered impotent. To offer battle would be absurd. It would be like a child swinging a stick at a tidal wave. Their weapons were designed to break ships and burn worlds, not to argue with the fundamental mathematics of the universe. To fight humanity would be to fight against reality itself. The Lumina, led by Archivist Lyra, were in a state of rapturous intellectual awe, their collective consciousness alight with the sheer scale of the new scientific and philosophical paradigms presented to them. They saw humanity not as a former prisoner, but as a prophet, delivering a new and terrible gospel. For Prelate Vexis, The moment was one of profound, crystalline clarity. He saw the long, unbroken line of concordance history not as a chain of wise decisions, but as a sequence of choices made from a single, corrupting emotion: fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the chaotic, fear of that which they could not control. Humanity had been the ultimate embodiment of that chaos, and so the concordance had committed its greatest sin in the name of order. They had sought to prune a unique and vibrant branch of galactic life, and in doing so, had nearly poisoned the entire tree. He rose from his dais, his movements slow and deliberate. The column of starlight shifted, turning a soft, contemplative gold. "Ambassador Rostova," Vexus projected, his voice resonating with the full authority of his office, but imbued with a new, uncharacteristic humility. "The concordance was wrong. We acted out of a belief in our own infallibility, and that belief has led the galaxy to the brink of a disaster we were too blind to see. We accept your diagnosis of our folly." He paused, letting the weight of the admission settle in the chamber. It was an unprecedented statement. The concordance did not admit error. Its authority was built on a myth of perfection. This was the first stone being removed from that foundation. "You speak of a price," Vexus continued. "You say it is humility, it is the acceptance of truth. On behalf of my people, the Cathar, and as prelate of this council, I formally accept these terms. We will lower our shields, stand down our fleets, and open our archives. We are ready to learn. We ask for your help." A ripple of assent spread through the sanctum. The lumina pulsed in agreement. The more moderate species signaled their concurrence. Even Zorgan, his form rigid with what Vexus could only interpret as a mixture of fury and begrudging respect, did not object. He had been defeated not by force of arms, but by the irrefutable weight of logic. A warrior could not fight a mathematical proof. Rostova's hologram inclined its head once more. "Your acceptance is noted, prelate, and it is welcomed. Our first task is to stabilize the null causality zone nearest to your capital. The vessel you see, which we have designated a harmonizer, will begin its work immediately. We will share all relevant data with your scientists. We wish for this to be a partnership, not a subjugation. Knowledge should be shared, not wielded as a weapon. That is another lesson our long isolation taught us." In the cycles that followed, a new and strange dynamic emerged. Human vessels, the silent black harmonizer spheres, arrived in the afflicted sectors of concordance space. They were accompanied by smaller, teardrop-shaped ships of iridescent white, which were revealed to be mobile research stations and diplomatic cruisers. Humans themselves, in contained environmental suits, began to meet with concordance scientists and leaders. The aliens found the humans to be a deeply unsettling species. They were quiet, efficient, and possessed a preternatural calm. They spoke with precision and logic, yet their art and music, which they shared freely, still contained the soaring, chaotic emotions of their ancestors. They were a people who had integrated their paradoxes, not eliminated them. They had the souls of poets and the minds of engineers, and the combination was formidable. Vexus met personally with Ambassador Rostova aboard one of the white cruisers. The interior of the ship was as minimalist and profound as its exterior. There were no visible controls, only soft, shifting light and walls that seemed to be made of solidified thought, displaying data or serene, natural landscapes at a whim. They sat in a chamber that overlooked a star nursery, the vibrant clouds of gas and dust a stark contrast to the stark functionality of the human vessel. "I must ask," Vexus said, his form seated on a pedestal of condensed light the ship had generated for him. "Your transformation, how was it achieved? The records of your species show a history defined by conflict. How did you unify? How did you achieve this serenity?" Rostova looked out at the nebula, her reflection a faint ghost on the transparent wall. "We had no other choice, prelate. The quarantine was the greatest gift the concordance could have ever given us. It presented us with a single, external, existential threat, the slow decay of our reality. It was a problem that could not be solved by building a better weapon or by conquering a neighbor. It could not be solved by one nation or one ideology. It required the total, focused effort of our entire species." She turned to face him, her blue eyes filled with a history he could only begin to comprehend. "Our old divisions, nationality, religion, politics, they became luxuries we could no longer afford. They were addictions, and our survival depended on breaking them. We were forced to mature. We funneled all of our species, aggression, our competitiveness, our drive, not against each other, but against an impartial, unforgiving cosmic problem. We waged a war against entropy itself. And in that war, we found a unity that had eluded us for our entire history." "You did not seek power?" Vexus asked. It was the fundamental drive of almost every species he had ever encountered. Power is a means to acquire resources and ensure security, Rostova replied with the simple clarity of a fundamental principle. We developed matter fabrication and energy harnessing technologies that made resources effectively infinite, and security could only be achieved by solving the space-time problem, not by dominating others. Conquest became a meaningless concept, a relic of a scarcity-based evolutionary past. Our goal was not to become powerful, it was to become competent. The power was merely a byproduct of the competence we were forced to attain. Their conversation was a revelation for Vexus. He saw that the Concordance, for all its might, was still trapped in the old paradigm. It saw power as control over others. Humanity had discovered that true power was control over oneself, and through that, a mastery of the natural laws of the universe. The partnership solidified. Human harmonizers, guided by joint scientific teams, began the slow, delicate work of mending the tears in spacetime. The null zones began to shrink. A sense of cautious optimism, something the galaxy had not felt for millennia, began to spread. The feared apocalypse had been averted, and in its place was a burgeoning renaissance of science, culture, and philosophy. The humans did not gloat or demand reparations. They simply worked, shared, and taught. The price of humility, once paid, was yielding unimaginable dividends. It was during the repair of the oldest and largest null zone, a vast abyss of cosmic decay left by the filtering of a long-forgotten species, that the final twist was revealed. The harmonizer sphere, its systems delving deeper into the fundamental structure of reality than any concordance instrument had ever gone, detected an anomaly. It was not a flaw in spacetime. It was a signal. Faint, structured, and impossibly ancient, buried deep within the quantum foam, like a watermark on the page of the universe. Rostova requested an immediate, private meeting with Vexus and the highest echelons of the Concordance leadership. They gathered not in the grand sanctum, but in the sterile, data-rich environment of a human command center, a holographic projection of the anomaly displayed between them. During our work, our deep reality sensors have been mapping the quantum architecture of this sector, Rostova began, her tone graver than Vexus had ever heard it. We have found that the decay caused by your quarantine field was not entirely random. The specific energy frequency of your containment technology, by pure, tragic coincidence, acted as a resonator. It amplified a pre-existing weakness in this region of space. She manipulated the hologram. A complex wave pattern appeared, nested within a representation of the quantum foam. There is a signal embedded in the fabric of spacetime itself. It is not being broadcast now. It was imprinted at a time when the universe was much younger. We believe it is a message, or more accurately, a warning. The wave pattern was translated into visual data. A series of complex diagrams and alien mathematical formulas filled the air. This signal was left by a civilization that we can only call the First Ascended. They existed billions of years before your concordance, perhaps even before life began on our homeworld. They were, by all indications, masters of this galaxy, and they are gone. Archivist Lyra's light form flickered with intense concentration. What does the warning say? It is a story and a prediction, Rostova said, her face grim. They speak of an extragalactic force, a phenomenon they call the static. It is not a species, it is not an empire, it is a principle of cosmic erosion, a form of intelligent, predatory entropy that moves between galaxies over inconceivable timescales. It does not conquer, it quiets. It reduces complex systems, life, stars, civilizations, even the laws of physics, to a state of simplified, inert uniformity. The room grew cold. Zorgan, for the first time, looked genuinely afraid. This was a foe that could not be fought with ships, a concept of an enemy that defied his entire understanding of conflict. The First Ascended fought it, Rostova continued, her voice a low murmur. But they could not defeat it. Their final act was to encode this warning, this message in a bottle thrown into the ocean of time. They described the early signs of the static's arrival, subtle shifts in universal constants, an increase in acausal phenomena, a fraying of the edges of reality. She looked at Vexus, and he felt the final, terrible piece of the puzzle click into place. The null zones, Vexus whispered. They weren't just our scars, they were the symptoms. Yes, Rostova confirmed. The static is already here at the edges of our galaxy. Its influence is still faint, detectable only to the most sensitive instruments. Your quarantine technology did not create the disease, Prelate. It only aggravated the symptoms, making them visible to us. It was a planetary alarm bell, and your concordance inadvertently rang it. The truth descended upon them all, a weight far heavier than the revelation of their own folly. Their squabbles, their politics, their great filter, their fear of a species like humanity, it had all been a distraction. A children's game played in a house whose foundations were slowly being eaten away. They had spent millennia worrying about the wrong threats, looking inward, while the real danger, a silent, cosmic horror, was approaching from the unimaginable darkness between the galaxies. Vexis looked at Ambassador Rostova, at the representative of the species they had locked away for being too chaotic, too dangerous. He saw the quiet competence, the hard-won serenity forged in a crucible of their own making. He realized, with a sense of cosmic irony so profound it was almost painful, that humanity's forced evolution had not just been for their own survival. Their frantic, desperate race to understand the fundamental nature of reality to escape their prison had turned them into the one people in the galaxy who could understand, and perhaps even fight, the true enemy. The Concordance had created its own jailer, its own judge, and ultimately its own savior. The message, "You made this choice, you were warned, now pay the price," took on its final, ultimate meaning. The Concordance's choice had not just been about humanity. It was a choice that had inadvertently revealed the true nature of the universe and the price of survival within it. The price was no longer just humility. The price was a war for existence itself, a war against the encroaching silence at the end of all things. And they would face it together, the old, fearful galaxy and its newly matured, impossibly competent children, united at last by a fear far greater than any they could have ever held for each other. The real struggle had just begun.